here, we made it. All right, so I'll go ahead and launch in as folks keep trickling in. Thank you all again for joining us. This is our Valuing Black Lives Initiative Town Hall. And so the goal of today is really to keep you all as our campus community informed as we launch into this critical work. And so before we jump in to all the details, I'd like to go over our land acknowledgement and our community guidelines. Pull that up, give me 1 second. Apologies. All right, so starting with our land acknowledgement. So the local indigenous people, including the Yokuts and Miwok, who understand the earth as a place for everyone, first inhabited the land where UC Merced is located. When we address diversity on this campus, we do so boldly, daring to look forward and backward, imagining diversity's demand for the 21st century, and the importance of diversity in addressing past wrongs, reaffirming humanity, and ensuring a reconciliatory path of redress for the future. The most prominent path on our campus is called Scholars Lane. By day, you can see, hear, and witness the embodiment of our diversity through campus community members making their way across campus, framed by the slopes and peaks of the Sierra Nevada. And as of late, actually physically seeing our students back on campus. And so a couple reflection questions to go along with that land acknowledgement so that it's not just a statement, but an opportunity for us to critically reflect. What intentions do you have to disrupt and dismantle colonialism beyond this land acknowledgement? And what is your organization doing beyond acknowledging whose land and labor allow you to live, work, and/or learn in that space? And so a few community agreements for us all to sit with as we engage in this important conversation. We agree to speak for ourselves and allow others to speak for themselves with no pressure to represent or explain to a whole group. We agree to listen with resilience, hanging in when something is hard to hear. We agree to consider asking a question to check out the assumption we are making rather than taking that assumption or assumptions as fact. We agree to share airtime and participate within the suggested timeframe. We agree to not interrupt except to indicate that we cannot or did not hear a speaker. We agree to pass or pass for now if we are not ready or willing to respond to a question. We agree that when we discuss our experience with people who are not present, we will not attach names or other identifying information to participant comments unless we have permission to do so. And lastly, and arguably most importantly, we agree this is a space of learning and that no one, even the presenter or presenters, can know all things and that we are all in a process of learning. And so important guidelines for us to keep in mind as we engage in this conversation. And so before we launch in, I'd like to turn it over to our interim Chief Diversity Officer, Cecil Howard. For those of you who've had an opportunity to meet him, and for those of you who have not, he's been with us for about almost 2 weeks now. And we're super excited to engage with him at this critical juncture of this work. So take it away, Cecil.
Thank you so much, Hala. Good morning, and thank you for your attendance here this morning. I have to tell you, I'm just extremely excited, first and foremost, just to even be in this space and to engage in this level of dialogue and conversation about deliberate and intentional actions that an institution of higher education is taking as it pertains to the valuing of Black lives and engaging in anti-Black, anti-racism type of work. Trust me when I tell you that this level that we're operating is much higher than what I've seen around the country. So I'm extremely proud of this work that you're doing. I'm extremely happy. And as I said, just excited to be a part of it. A year of work that began in the summer of 2020, following the murder of George Floyd and our heightened awareness of racial violence and inequity is what's driving this work. In July 2020, the Valuing Black Lives Task Force was charged. The charge for that task force was put out by Chancellor and Provost. And then in February of 2021, the culminating task force recommendations were shared with the Chancellor and Provost. And then in June 2021, the Chancellor and Provost penned a memorandum with commitments that spanned 5 years and $2.5 million. Combating anti-racism and demonstrating a commitment to valuing Black lives is integral to ensuring inclusive excellence at this university. In fact, UC Merced has the opportunity to be a nationwide model for how we integrate anti-racism and value Black lives in every facet of our operations. This also gives us an opportunity to amplify and support the existing work that various individuals and units on this campus have engaged in their own efforts to value Black lives. This is an opportunity for collaboration, as combating anti-Blackness must be a collective effort. So what I'd like to do at this point is introduce you to Chancellor Munoz and Executive Chancellor and Provost Camfield, and they will engage you further in this effort here. Chancellor Munoz and Provost Camfield have demonstrated a commitment towards valuing Black lives, first by sponsoring the Valuing Black Lives Task Force, as well as their recently penned memorandum, which serves as the starting piece of this initiative. They recognize that combating anti-Blackness and facilitating the success of our Black community by extension ensures the success of our entire university. I would now turn it over to them for opening remarks. Chancellor.
Thank you. Thank you, Cecil, and thank you all for joining us today. And special thanks to all of the members of the task force that have worked on these recommendations in this initiative. And I want to also acknowledge that this effort was guided in large part by the leadership of our former diversity officer, Danya Matos, who, of course, many of us know has taken a position at UC Berkeley, where we remain grateful for her leadership and all of those who helped in the development of this particular effort. As you heard a moment ago from Interim Chief Diversity Officer Howard, the Valuing Black Lives Initiative at Merced, like so many around the country, was unfortunately catalyzed by the death and murder and death of George Floyd. But at UC Merced, our initiative calls us to create a brighter and more just future for all. And we will continue this important work and ensure that it remains, as you heard a minute ago from our colleague Cecil Howard, that it remains active and visible in every aspect of the institution and part of the permanent identity of the university. To further ensure the success of our effort, not just the rhetorical indulgence, the financial commitments outlined in our June memo, the Provost Camfield and I, to implement key Valuing Black Lives initiatives, as you heard again earlier from our colleague, Mr. Howard, amounts to just approximately 2.5 million over 5 years. Now, we intend for this unprecedented financial commitment to signal the importance of these efforts and other equity-minded activities across our campus, both on campus and off campus, to signal the importance that we place on them. But also, let me make clear, at least I have the intention for further commitments of programs, further commitment of activity, further commitment of staff that will complement these initial commitments guided by the work of this task force. As part of this overall reimagining of social equity, social justice, and valuing Black lives at UC Merced, we remain committed also to the reconceptualization of community policing on our campus, and we will work diligently to implement the reforms and recommendations many of you are familiar with that were recently outlined and provided to us by President Drake and its community safety plan. I have asked, incidentally, regarding that community safety plan that was recently provided to us, the guideline by the Office of the President, Dr. Michael Drake. I have asked the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Charles Neese, to lead our implementation of these critical efforts, and I look forward to working with Dr. Neese to help to update the community and our campus on our progress. And I think it's important that a member of the cabinet, a vice chancellor, serve as the lead so that, as was indicated earlier, every aspect of the institution, of the enterprise, is informed of the importance of these steps and recommendations to create a campus where all thrive. As our memo and recent commitment make abundantly clear, we are deeply committed to increasing the number of applications, the recruitments, the admissions, and the thriving experience of Black and African American students on our campus. And again, I'm going to take advantage of Mr. Howard's point and to serve as a national model in this regard, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. And I know that this is something that Dr. Canfield is equally deeply committed to at a personal level, well beyond our professional positions. We've provided significantly more space to the Black Scholars Resource and Retention Centers in Granite Pass, the new facilities, moving it from the 3rd floor of the library. We are also working to hire a new director of Black Student Success to serve under the Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Education. We need to become much more deliberate, much more purposeful, and much more substantive in our approach. With respect to staff recruitment and retention, we will reevaluate internal business practices and hiring policies to develop community-friendly recruitment strategies with emphasis on our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I will tell you, personal relationships to bring people to be part of this campus, which I will also take advantage of Mr. Howard's point, which I agree with. The things that we are doing, imagining, conceptualizing, implementing are well ahead of many campuses across the country. But we cannot achieve the degree of success without the participation and support of everyone that's part of this call and part of this institution. So personal relationships with the BIOC community and Merced, I think have never been more important. And I encourage all of us to reach out and connect. I have already personally met with any number of community leaders, and I hope that they will help us in this regard. And I continue to meet almost on a weekly basis with community leaders from all parts of Merced, east, north, west, and south, on the other side of Childs, by the swap meet. In fact, during one of these meetings, I invited a member and a local community leader who's also African American, who works in the area of restorative justice. I was so impressed with his leadership, his experience, his familiarity with the community. I asked him to serve on the search committee for the next vice chancellor, for the next chief diversity officer and vice chancellor. And I was so pleased that he accepted. And I believe this is the first time this kind of deliberate outreach to community to serve on the selection of cabinet level positions may have been done here. It's important to note, and I mentioned it just a minute ago, with the permission of the Office of the President, Michael Drake, a re-envisioned CDO position is being implemented here, and it will be a vice chancellor, no longer an associate vice chancellor, but a vice chancellor, which then invokes a different divisional structure, similar to POPD and division of finance, et cetera, et cetera. And we believe that we will have an outstanding pool of applicants that will fill this position. In fact, I've already received any number of inquiries from people all over the country excited to be part of this community and this campus. And we thank Mr. Brown for his leadership and service in this interim role while we search for a permanent colleague to serve in this important capacity. I want to just tell you again in closing how grateful I am for the leadership of this group, for a staff in the EDI office, for our colleague, Danya Matos, for her continued success in this work at Berkeley, and for all that have been part of this, former Senate Chair, Dr. DeLugan, and her leadership, both on and off campus. I have no doubt as to the promising future that we will all be part of developing. I look forward to working alongside you in this regard. And I now will invite our colleague, Dr. Canfield, the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost, to talk about how valuing Black lives and valuing Black lives initiatives at UC Merced will be implemented across our teaching and research enterprise. Dr. Canfield.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Munoz. I'm it's actually a very long list. And if I were to go through it all, I would take far too much time just listing the things we're doing. But what I want to highlight is that it's not just top down. What I'm really seeing happening on campus is a sea change, and the murder of George Floyd seemed to be the catalyst. I know of 4 independently begun grassroots efforts among the faculty to ask what an anti-racist pedagogy would look like, how behaviors in the classroom are exclusive and how they can become inclusive. And I think that is, to my mind, the most important thing that's happened. And there are many things that we're doing at the upper levels. I took our campus's leadership to push the entire UC system to expand the UC Leads program, which is a program by which we cultivate undergraduates, diverse undergraduates, to get into PhD programs. And at the same time, in part because of Chancellor Munoz's excellent contacts, we have been reaching out, something I began before George Floyd's murder with HSIs, to create pathways for students from other universities and colleges to get into our PhD program. Dr. Munoz added 3 HBCUs to our initiative. And one of those, in fact, we have developed a new contact with through Suzanne Cindy using the UC HBCU partnership. So we already have a person coming from that institution, but we hope that is the beginning of a strong pathway. Now, why am I focused on that? I'm going to back up a little bit, if you don't mind. One of the things the Chancellor said is something about my personal commitment. This tie I'm wearing right now, this was my father's. When he passed away in February of 2020, I inherited all of his ties. I think fat 1970s tie. And I haven't been able to wear ties too much because we've been not in person. But now that I'm back on campus daily and I'm wearing them, I'm reminded of them every day. And I'm reminded of how much he shared his work with me. When he was tapped the first Deputy Regional Administrator for the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Region 9 in Denver, and then tapped to be the second area director for Los Angeles for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. These were Great Society programs designed to implement the historic civil rights legislation that came out of the movement of the 50s and 60s. And it was a question of implementing and institutionalizing. And what he said to me, and that has always resonated for me, was you have to approach these questions institutionally, because institutions make racism easy. A white person doesn't have to worry about excluding a Black neighbor from a neighborhood if the institutions make it invisible. And so we have to change institutions. They also told me always to keep your eyes on why, that it's about the dignity and value of each individual person. Every slight, every barrier that's institutional is harmful, and they have to be knocked down. Well, that was the early days. And I think we're now at a stage where we understand the institution is in us, that we have been institutionalized, and it makes it easy for us to be racist. And I can't tell you how many times I have heard faculty and administrators say, well, we would love to hire more people of color into the faculty, but they're just not out there in the pool. Why not? Because we have done nothing to change the pathways into graduate programs, to change the culture of graduate studies so that it's inviting rather than exclusionary. And that, to my mind, is one of the most important things that we can undertake as a University of California, is to create new pathways to become the exemplar of a research university, inviting into and cultivating and nurturing through explicitly anti-racist mentoring, as well as admissions programs and placement tactics for the next generation of diverse faculty. When I am on my deathbed, I do not want to hear anyone say, we can't diversify the faculty because there isn't a big enough pool. So to my mind, that's the biggest thing we're going to be doing, and we're going to institutionalize it. And I look forward to people like Suzanne Cindy to step forward. We actually have a grant proposal with Cal State Bakersfield that will be asking for $250,000. And we have 7 faculty members here who are on that proposal promising to be mentors for people they've never met. And we are setting up mentoring relationships with Fort Lewis College, which is about 40% Native American in its population, with 3 historically Black colleges and universities, and with 5 different HSIs to have bilateral mentoring, summer research experiences for undergraduates. We are going to create as many pathways as we can. And that's the promise I'm making to you now, and I'm inviting you to step on that pathway with me as we try to change the face of higher education. And to my dad.
Thank you so much, Chancellor and Provost, for those opening remarks. I'm especially proud of the CSU Bakersfield partnership, given that that's my alma mater where I received my undergraduate degree before coming here. So I'm always excited to hear about these partnerships taking place.
And by the way, I have asked Cecil Howard if I can steal some of Paula's time to help support this initiative.
Absolutely, and
yeah.
I'm 100% supportive of it.
Yeah, we both happily agreed to contributing to this work. So before I launch in to help contextualize a bit of what Chancellor and Provost discussed as part of this initiative, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Robin DeLugan, who served as the Academic Senate Liaison in the previous academic year and played a critical role in the Valuing Black Lives Task Force and what shaped what is now eventually going to be this initiative. So turn it over to you, Dr. DeLugan.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Al-Najjar Hala. So in the past 2 years, I've served as vice chair and then chair of the Academic Senate. In this role, I was able to have a key opportunity to participate in the Valuing Black Lives initiative, which we are exploring today. As has been mentioned already, and not to be forgotten, the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer on May 25th, 2020 became a catalyst for national and international outrage. With one more act of violence against Black lives, what will it take to end the historical injustice? The response at UC Merced, as across many institutions in the US, was the imperative to take action, make changes, dismantle institutional racism, and foment anti-racism on campus and in our community. In early June of that year, 2020, petitions, demands, and calls to action were led by faculty in critical race and ethnic studies and the Black Student Union. They organized to raise voices and concerns across our campus. In response, the Valuing Black Lives Administrative Task Force was immediately initiated. Danya Matos, as we've heard mentioned, and gratefully so, to have her role. Jonathan Grady, who is Associate Vice Chancellor and Dean of Students, and myself as Academic Senate Liaison, served as the task force administrative co-leads. This was a collaborative effort, and over the summer of 2020, the composition and membership of the task force took form. 5 subcommittees were established as follows: student support, staff and faculty recruitment and retention, scholarship research and funding opportunities, policing, and community engagement. Each subcommittee had co-facilitators that represented the following constituencies: students, both undergraduate and graduate, staff, faculty, especially as represented through relevant academic senate committees, university administration, and non-UC Merced community representatives. they were like the facilitators of these committees that were formed. Others across campus eagerly volunteered to join the subcommittees of this task force with the goal of identifying opportunities and solutions. The work of the task force advanced through fall semester 2020 with regular check-ins and the sharing of information across all subcommittees. So they didn't necessarily work in silos. We thought there were threads that cut across these different subcommittees, and we sought to amplify that as well. By the end of the fall semester, the subcommittees made presentations about their findings and recommendations to Chancellor Munoz and Executive Vice Chancellor Provost Camfield. And an executive summary report was prepared and submitted that detailed the work of the Valuing Black Lives Task Force. Next, you will hear more details about the task force accomplishments, including some more specific recommendations and actions that campus has already been taken, which we've been hearing about here, or that are being planned. I'm proud of our campus for this groundbreaking work and our ongoing efforts to advance equity and inclusion. What is essential is that we do not lose sight of the urgency that motivated the Valuing Black Lives Task Force into being, and that we continue to advance the work and measure our progress. Maybe you have noted, as I have, that already much of the media reporting that was so essential to raising concerns across the nation and world seem to have moved on to other exigencies, as media tends to do. Let us not take our eye off the goals and commitments so that we can fill our aspiration for a more fair, just, and inclusive UC Merced and society at large. Thank you for your attention and for letting me participate in this important next step of the task force. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. DeLugan. Before I launch in, I want to remind folks, if you do have questions, there is the Q&A button, and so we'll be sure to get to those before the end of this town hall. So to help us contextualize, to go over the timeline that was already discussed. So as was discussed in May and June of 2020, we saw the Black Student Union call to action statement, as well as the We Charge Anti-Blackness petition. And this, of course, spurred our leaders to craft some responses. And one of those responses being the Valuing Black Lives Task Force charge that came out in July 2020. In August of 2020, we saw some responses directly to the petitions that were mentioned, as well as a response memo to the Pan-African Council, as well as the beginning of the building out of the subcommittees of the task force. Going over to December of 2020, all of the subcommittees reported out their recommendations to Chancellor and Provost with goals similar to the structure of the memo that spanned short-term, midterm, and long-term goals. In February of 2021, the task force administrative co-leads, our previous Chief Diversity Officer, Danya Matos, Dr. DeLugan, and our previous Dean of Students, Jonathan Grady, submitted a report that summarized the culmination of the subcommittee recommendations, but also provided some recommendations in terms of the implementation phase of these recommendations. And so in June 2021, we saw the memo that Chancellor and Provost penned in response to these recommendations. And our office, the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, also published a Valuing Black Lives Initiative annual report to summarize our yearly efforts, and something we plan on continuing to do so that our efforts are continuously documented and highlighted. And so now, launching into this academic year, this is the beginning phase of launching the Valuing Black Lives Initiative. And the memo, as I will further discuss, is a beginning piece of that, but as Chancellor and Provost also stated, is not the culmination of the entire initiative in itself. It is only our first steps into launching this initiative. And one of our large goals of this first year is to build out an implementation team that can guide us towards how to do this work in a way that's most effective and ensures that we not only meet our goals, but continue to reassess our goals as we move this initiative forward. And so as we move forward, it's really critical to acknowledge the historical context of our institution. As was mentioned, these, the task force and the initiative came directly because of the murder of George Floyd. And so we have to acknowledge that this work started as reactionary. And as we shift out of that reactionary effort, we have to ensure that this is part of the infrastructure of our campus. And so while it began as reactionary, our goal is now to build it into the thread of all of our campus functionalities. And so valuing, as the title of this initiative, is an intentional, action-based, and reflective commitment towards anti-racism and inclusive excellence. And so valuing as this, verb piece of this initiative calls on us collectively as a campus to reflect on not only how do we value Black lives, but how have we perpetuated anti-racism in our campus, and how do we begin to combat the anti-Blackness that does exist on this campus. And so some highlights of some of the work that did come forward in the previous academic year, we have the Chancellor's Inclusive Excellence Fellowships. And these fellowships were pre-doctoral fellowships that gave full stipends to support incoming grad students for 12 months so that they can focus on their research and academics. And it was specifically made to identify students whose studies would contribute to the representation of Black scholars in academia and beyond. We also had the Black Research Fellowships. Both of these are continuing this year as well, which provided 4 research fellowships of $2,500 to fund the creation of projects that demonstrate a commitment and ability to advance racial justice and Black liberation at UC Merced. Our office assisted in the development of the Valuing Black Lives dashboard, which visualizes data on some of the efforts that began in 2020 as a response to the petitions and demands of our campus. Some of the elements that you'll find in this dashboard include progress towards diversifying our faculty and staff, admission, retention, and graduation rates of our Black scholars, and the allocation of funds for Black success across all different stakeholders. We also had the hiring of our community wellness director, Lauren Ludlow, who is specifically, the goal is for Lauren to work with the campus community to develop programs, partnerships, and to introduce innovative ideas for how we can enhance community engagement with the UC Merced Police Department. And most recently, we had the job posting for the African Black Recruitment and Outreach Specialist. And this position will work closely with our office as well as admissions to ensure not only the outreach to potential Black students, but also the retention. So not only to figure out how we bring students here, but how to ensure that our campus is most welcoming and supportive to those students once they do arrive here. And so diving a little bit into the memo that was penned by Chancellor and Provost, Chancellor gave us a nice overview of some of the commitments that were made in that memo. And if you take a look at the memo, all of these will also be shared with you so you all can take a deeper dive in your own time. The memo is scaffolded in these 3 different time blocks. You have our year 1 goals, years 2 to 4 goals, and year 5 goals. So looking at those year 1 goals, a lot of these efforts are towards increasing our communication and education of our campus community so that we all have a collective understanding of what valuing Black lives means and what anti-racism looks like in our individual work. It also begins to build the infrastructure for accountability and transparency of this work. And it also ensures that we're maintaining the work that started as a response to the murder of George Floyd, and as Chancellor mentioned, is not something that we then lose sight of as these years move forward. And in years 2 to 4, you'll see that these goals, we begin to make serious strides in our commitment to inclusive excellence with some focus around mental health goals, education goals, student leadership and development, research goals, and classroom pedagogical goals. And then in year 5, you see the expansion of the Black Scholar Resource and Retention Center goals. And you see that in year 5, we're using the infrastructure that we've created to create institutional and cultural shifts that demonstrate our commitment to valuing Black lives. And so a few important things to keep in mind as you do dive deeper into this memo is that this memo does demonstrate our institutionalized commitment to valuing Black lives, not only by signaling the commitment to leadership, but also identifying all the units who must play a role in demonstrating that our campus collectively values Black lives. It also requires that this valuation be a collective responsibility. The work towards anti-racism does not only come, from the EDI office. It is something that we all, as a campus, have to take on. And most importantly, as Chancellor mentioned, these commitments that are outlined in this memo are not definitive. This work has to be iterative. We have to be responsive to the evolving needs of our campus. And this work has to be informed by the needs of our campus community. We run the risk of checking things off a list if we decide that the memo is the only thing to look towards in terms of how we value Black lives. And so we must constantly evaluate how we can combat anti-Blackness on our campus to ensure that this is an ongoing work that goes far beyond the commitments in the memo and far beyond the 5 years that are outlined in the memo as well. And so as we work on establishing accountability, which is a key piece of the memo, our office has developed a pulse check tool in ensuring that the various units who are responsible for these commitments are not only making the progress, but also have the support of leadership in making progress towards these initiatives. So I'd like to turn it over to our equity analyst, Wendy, and our graduate student researcher, Maria, to tell us a little bit more about the pulse check tool.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Hala. So as Hala was mentioning, the VBL memo has outlined like a variety of tasks designed to respond to the recommendations of the VBL Task Force Co-Leads report. So in order to help with accountability and to facilitate reporting out to the Senior Administrative Council, we dissolved the pulse check tool for the task outlined in year 1 of the memo. So this tool is designed to be like a very high level check-in regarding leads progress towards the completion of their tasks, and responses will help Hala connect with each lead to prepare for the Senior Administrator Council meetings. So the process you see in the slide up there demonstrates that we've designed it to be in preparation for that meeting. So respondents will get the pulse check tool about 3 weeks prior to the meeting. It'll remain open for about a week. After that week is over, Hala then has about 2 weeks to connect with leads to gain more context. Again, it's a very high level tracking of what everybody is doing. And once she gets to connect with them and gain some context for their responses, that will also allow everybody really to prepare for their report out to the Senior Admin Council, which will happen about 3 weeks after they receive the tool. And that's about it. So again, the purpose here is to try to facilitate the meeting, and also it's an effort in maintaining accountability for the tasks we're responsible for.
All right, thank you, Wendy. And so now we'd like to give folks an opportunity to ask questions regarding the initiative. And our interim Chief Diversity Officer, Cecil Howard, will assist us in moderating this portion of our town hall.
Thank you again, Hala, for that. Yes, indeed, this is that portion of the program. We are open to any questions that you may have, and we will make sure we address those issues and address them as thoroughly as we possibly can do. I do want to point out before we get started with the question and answer session, though, is that just to kind of reiterate some of the comments that you heard, but the one I want to really be sure to drive home is that this is an iterative process, number one, and it is our goal, our hope, our committed desire that this be a complete collaborative effort with all entities associated with the university community. There are a lot of individuals, there are a lot of units, there are a lot of interests regarding and engaged in this space as it pertains to valuing Black lives. Our hope is to make sure that we can combine our resources, combine our intellectual capital to make sure we can put forth the best product possible. So if you got questions on that, certainly know that that's where we're driving, and that's where we hope to be at the end of year 5 and hopefully even beyond there. Thank you. So Hala, will questions go into the Q&A? Okay, I see some there. Should I read them out, or will you read them out, or?
Yeah, I can read them out and assist with moderating. So One of the first questions that we have is specifically about Black staff experiences and how they can vary from other groups on campus, and highlighting Takoa Pope's research before she left that showed us how staff specifically can experience racism. And so the question is, what is the work to improve staff experiences as a strategic goal, as a lot of the work has focused on student and faculty success. And so the question is around what are some initiatives geared specifically towards staff success?
Is that directed at anyone in particular, or should we?
It's not directed at anyone in particular. And so wherever folks feel like they can jump in to address that.
So let me first say that this effort, I'm new to this space, and I'm new to this matter here, but I'm not new to this subject matter. This is the order of the day around higher education. Like I said earlier, though, I do believe what we're doing here is well beyond and well ahead of what I'm seeing in many other respects around the country. But as it pertains to the Valuing Black Lives initiative here, our goal is to be as holistic and as inclusive as we possibly can to make sure that the focus is not only on students, it's not only on faculty, it's not only on administrators and staff, but it's a process, and it's an engagement that is designed to impact everyone associated. I mean, all of you and all of these individual interests are what we consider our stakeholders. And our goal is to make sure that it impacts all of them such that their experience as it pertains to the University of California, Merced, is recognized and is valued as anyone else. And so I will tell you that even though I'm interim, I'm not looking at this from an interim perspective. It is my goal to make sure that all interests are included in the work and in what we're doing in this regard here.
I'll jump in. It's a little bit out of my direct line of influence, but maybe I have something to say. So we do surveys and we find out climate, and we do get some of these facts for staff and others on campus, what's going on. And so we definitely have mechanisms for monitoring and kind of measuring, are we improving or are we not? But as an anthropologist, as a cultural anthropologist, so much of what we're doing is, you can think of things like that we're doing for students, pathways to the professoriate or to graduate school. And I know that some staff concerns, and maybe African-American staff concerns, are about similar pathways to success and ensuring that all levels of leadership are as diverse as we want our community to be. But it's also, as an anthropologist, it's also a cultural matter. When we're talking about interpersonal dynamics, not just do I have a chance at professional success, but how is the climate and how are my interactions with my colleagues or other campus people? That's a cultural question, and that's the work of all of us, right? As been mentioned, it's the ongoing work, it's the iterative work that we all have to do. But I think that there are definitely some parallels between thinking about what we're doing to advance student success and what we can do to advance faculty success, and the important measuring and monitoring that we are making advances in those directions.
Hala, I might offer just a few observations if I may.
Yes, please, Chancellor.
Okay, just a few points. I want to take advantage of a few points that Mr. Howard and Dr. DeLugan have made. First of all, and this is not unrelated to the earlier point that the provost made in terms of pathways to the doctorate, to the professoriate. What we need to do is create opportunities for our colleagues on campus, in particular, in this case, African-American colleagues, for them to have a ladder of opportunity in the way Dr. DeLugan is intimating. But that in and of itself is not sufficient. It has to be a ladder of opportunity that is professionally rewarding and personally satisfying. That is both the ladder and the context in which the ladder is located. So we have to look at both the structural opportunities for advancement, as well as the broader context in which that advancement occurs. And only by that combination, that more sophisticated, nuanced understanding, are we going to have people in positions to bring to the leadership their satisfactions as well as their dissatisfactions. Because in the absence of that representation in the leadership, in the way the provost is referring to African Americans in the professoriate, in the absence of that constituency in the leadership, other leaders may not be privy to real-time context and examples. So we have to work on multiple fronts. And so we have to look at pay equity, pay parity, compression, opportunity, professional development. We have to look at acknowledgement of those that are doing work above and beyond. We have to create opportunities for our colleagues who are in certain positions, not just for professional development, but how can we encourage their continued academic credential development? Are there programs we can put in place for people to pursue master's degrees, MBAs outside of the institution? Are there pathways that we can be a part of to encourage some of our staff colleagues to pursue credentials even outside of UC Merced that could be applied within UC Merced? So I see any number of issues that we have to iteratively work to address, that it's all, it's part of an ecosystem of success, satisfaction, and support that we have to rethink. And certainly this is a part of what should be our considerations relative to, in this case, African-American staff members, and in a way that we haven't in the past, in the way that we must in the future. And this conversation that we're having and will ensure that we do, not just for the immediate future, not just in month one, year one, okay, but as a common practice of our institution, in the way you heard, I believe, Provost Canfield intimate. This has got to be, as the cultural anthropologist reminded us, part of the culture of the institution, and as our provost reminds us, part of the structure of our institution.
So another question posed. Thank you all for your commitments and hard work. Could someone reflect on the built-in tensions of the path to R1 status and these initiatives? Funders that will put us in the running for R1 do not support research on structural racism, for example.
Would you like me to take that?
Yes, please.
All right. This is a significant perceptual problem, I think, in higher education, to imagine that the only kind of intellectual work that is anti-racist or anti-Black is the content. And that somehow or another, those who aren't studying the content are absolved of any responsibility. I think that is flat wrong. And this goes back to what I was saying about how we have replicated practices in every discipline that are exclusionary. So the work we can do to change the way we think is not about the content of our research. It's about the process by which we do research, the way we teach, the way we mentor, the way we behave as colleagues, the way we reach out to our communities, not just the scholarly communities that most of us are primarily attached to, but the other kinds of communities. Robin was one of the founders of our efforts on this campus to do community engaged scholarship. And I was invited to the first meetings, and I was so struck by how some of the faculty said, oh yeah, we want to do community engaged research because we want subjects for our studies. And Robin, very gracefully, I thought, said, no, that's not what we mean by community engaged scholarship. What we mean by that is that we partner with the communities and ask them about their needs, and we bring our tools to bear. Now, we're getting plenty of grant support for that kind of work. It's an attitude shift. It's a way of embracing our work, not the content per se. Robin, do you want to join me on that?
Just say thanks for that shout out. I would just say it doesn't make it's a zero-sum game either, R1 versus doing this kind of work. And just to say that I've been involved in a couple initiatives right here on campus that are these diversity initiatives that are about transforming the university, that are big funders interested in. So I just would just say perhaps these aren't as opposing as we might be thinking that they are, these goals. And that would just be my statement there.
Thank you, Provost and Dr. DeLugan. Let me also follow with another question, which is actually a build from that previous question. The other piece of the tension between valuing Black lives and the R1 goal is that the incentives for R1 focus on research. This will devalue teaching education. How do we not forget about students while working on R1? Would either of you care to reflect on that?
Well, let me, if I may insert myself prior to the provost, I will just say, I certainly, because I certainly believe that the provost should weigh in on this particular question as it relates to R1. But I will tell you that I do not see a future R1 where excellence in teaching and service is exclusive from research. That to be R1, okay, to be excellent means to be excellent in our intellectual inquiry, our discovery, our science, our process, our method, our recruitment, our support of students, that students thrive here, our support of our faculty, the support of our staff, an ecosystem that is excellent in all respects. So this false dichotomy, this vacuous narrative of one is at the expense of other. Let's think as we expect ourselves to in the University of California. Let's think with exceptionality about the promise of R1, where neither research, teaching, or service is compromised in the pursuit of our inevitable excellence in this regard. And so I tell you, I acknowledge the observation, and I believe many institutions have unfortunately fallen short in their commitment of student support, teaching, pedagogy, in the pursuit of research excellence. I believe at UC Merced we can do all three with excellence, and I absolutely predict that we will achieve R1 status sooner than anyone imagines because of the things that we're talking about right now.
Thank you, Chancellor.
I want to agree and dig in a little bit to explain my agreement that this is a false opposition. It works on the assumption that teaching is simply transmitting a dead body of knowledge, and research is about making new stuff. And that's just not the way it works. I mean, if it's just a question of transmitting a dead body of knowledge, that's an old idea. And what we really want to do is help students become transformative in their own lives and communities. And the way you do that is through inquiry. We are right now restructuring the way we teach our basic biology, chemistry, and math classes around inquiry, where principles of research are fundamental to the learning process. And we know that that is a powerful incentive to learning, a transformative incentive to learning, because knowledge isn't something dead to cram into your head for an exam. It's something to engage. It's vital. We have been extraordinarily successful at placing our students in academic graduate programs We're #1 in the UC system for master's completions, and we're in second place behind Berkeley for PhD completions. And we're so young. I mean, that's a 10-year window, right? Why? Because we pull so many undergraduates into real research, and it shows them that this is not dead, that it's alive. They're not opposed. If they're opposed, it's only because we're conceiving teaching, misconceiving teaching as simply the transfer of knowledge, the banking model, as Paulo Freire says. Oh, I'm making the chancellor laugh on that one.
Well, Dr. Canfield, I haven't heard a Freirean reference in quite some time. So, you know, as a former pedagogist, I appreciate your invocation of Freirean pedagogy of the oppressed. Well done.
Thanks to the both of you. Moving on. Next question. It's very true that institutions keep racism current. It's great to see that things are being put in place to invite Black students, relationships with the community are being built, and that funds are being placed toward addressing needs of the Black campus community. It's also true that progress needs standards and regulation to protect it. Here's the question. By what means of accountability will these initiatives be protected? How will the culture be shaped so that the initiatives can thrive? Chancellor, I don't know if you wanted to, I wanted to give some comment, but I believe I could tell by your nonverbal, you might want to offer something as well. Well, let me say this. It would be a waste of our time if we went to this effort to come up with this set of initiatives and to spend this amount of time that we've done only to not hold ourselves accountable. Because I can tell you, oftentimes what happens, I've seen it in many places, is whenever there's any type of major thrust to drive initiatives, over time, sometimes that set of initiatives gets laid on a dusty cabinet and sits there, and before you know it, everyone's forgotten about it. Well, I think in order to protect ourselves here, we've already discussed some ways in which we might go about making sure that we see not only through the end of 5 years, but even beyond that. First, we got to maintain a mindset of weaving what we do into the fabric of who we are. It must become a part of our culture. And you start that early enough so that you don't just look at this as a program, and as somebody indicated earlier, a checking of the box. So what we'll be doing is each semester, at the end of each semester, we will provide a semester report of where we were. So you saw it, if you recall, when Hala presented an overview, she showed you what the year 1 goals were, what years 2 to 4 goals and initiatives were, and then what the long-term goals and initiatives were in year 5. Well, our goal and plan is to make sure that at the end of each semester, we are not only providing you details in terms of where we are at that particular point in time, but at the end of each year, still go back and do a full report of what engaged that past year, where we are, and what goes forward. My goal is that we go beyond ourselves, even though that timeline, if you will, it's really nothing more than a guide. I always like to proceed and go beyond the guide. So number one, that's what you're going to see in that regard from this office here and from the committees and that are involved in this effort. I apologize for my voice. I find myself getting hoarse here. So I'll stop here, Chancellor.
Well, I reinforce Mr. Howard's points, and I was going to actually defer to our colleague Hala to just remind our participants, our colleagues, as to the timeline steps. The dashboard, I think, is going to be critical. And I will ask people's patience as we set up the dashboard. But again, we're going to come to this point of it being iterative, and certainly we will improve it. We will make it more flexible. We will make it more intuitive in order to provide people as accurate a representation of our progress that is public facing as possible. But I suppose I would invite Hala to further respond and embellish on Mr. Howard and my responses.
Yeah, thank you, Chancellor. I keep repeating the words accountability and transparency, because this work cannot move forward if we're not holding all of ourselves accountable. And part of that is also transparency, that we are communicating with the campus community at every step of the way, rather than approaching the campus community at the end of the year saying, this is what we've done. This has to be a process that we all collectively decide upon. And when the administrative co-leads of the task force built out these reports and we had the conversation with Chancellor and Provost, the key thing that we mentioned is this work must be institutionalized, which means that it must be coming from leadership and showing the backing of leadership to the rest of the campus community. And part of that has developed into what the pulse check tool is, because not only are we checking in with folks to make sure that they're making progress, but we're also demonstrating that leadership is committed to supporting if progress is not being made. What is hindering a certain unit from making the progress that they need to make to fulfill these commitments? And having that opportunity to speak directly with leadership is critical to maintaining that accountability, not only on the part of the implementers, but on the part of leadership, to ensure that we are all collectively supporting each other to meet these commitment goals. And the dashboard was developed last year, and part of our conversations around advancing this initiative is around, what are the measures that we're going to be using to determine the success of this initiative? And so as we start to build out an implementation team for this year who directs the how of this work, part of that is what are the measures that we'll be using to ensure its success, and how do we document that in a way that's accessible to the campus community, and what are the pieces that are critical for us to keep track of. I did see our analyst, who's our data person, unmute herself. So Wendy, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on that as well.
Sure, I can chime in. The dashboard, I want to give a shout out to the institutional research and decision support team, because they were the ones that built it before I arrived. And we're in the process of like a handoff to me so that I can continue to update it. But the dashboard was one way to kind of establish some baseline measures for the VBL initiative. So if you've had an opportunity to look at the dashboard, and I can drop the link in just a bit in the chat, that's where we're keeping track of like student enrollment of our Black students, staff and faculty composition, financial commitments to the VBL initiative. And the goal of the dashboard, as was explained to me, was to keep track and to kind of encourage accountability and to help implementing teams understand like what are the measures, like overarching measures we want to keep track of. VBL is ultimately it's about like the culture on campus, right? It's a climate initiative. Do we have a context that supports like our Black community, and does it allow them to thrive, right? And so that's what implementers can keep in mind, and those are some of the measures that we've tried to incorporate into the dashboard. And it also ties into some of the other work that I'm doing as an equity analyst. So the Campus Experience Survey Work Group is also a work group trying to strategize how best to survey our campus community and keep track of the campus experience for all constituents, including staff and faculty. And also trying to figure out, like, is there a way to tie the work that we're doing to the initiatives that are going on and being implemented by the various business units on campus? And do we see the needle moving, like, on that experience? Thank you, Hala. I hand it back to you.
So, moving on, we have another question that actually has several parts to it. So I think what I'll do is just read one part at a time and see if we can get some response on it and then move forward. First part of the question was, or the first part of the overall set of questions is, where diversity of thought, the person was asking for comment on the following areas. And the first one was where diversity of thought runs in the broader diversity initiatives.
Hala, I might invite you to respond, and I'm not sure if Ms. Cortez is also available. But given the recency of Mr. Howard's joining, it might be a bit more accurate for you, given your greater longevity within the particular department, soon to be a division, to respond.
I'm sorry to ask because I was thinking about another question in the chat, but can I get this question repeated one more time, Hala?
Yeah, so the question is asking specifically around where diversity of thought runs within the context of broader diversity initiatives.
Thank you. I can speak a little bit to that from the perspective of the equity and justice strategic planning process underway as it dovetails off of the university one. So part of this framework of inclusive excellence thinks about diversity as an idea. How does it show up in scholarship? How do we speak about it from an ideological perspective? Diversity of thought is a very real way to approach it. Are we thinking about how that diversity of thought is convened? Is it the people in the room, diversity of the people in the room? Is it from an intellectual perspective, the scholarship component? So part of these conversations must be co-held with the very people on our campus. So as we start to take stock of the different EDI initiatives, I know with some of the conversations I've had with our different deans and faculty, this is the perspective by which we collectively approach diversity is a conversation to be held. And we need to collectively come to an understanding so that that opens up the door for inclusive excellence as our priority. There are different perspectives in the diversity world, but we know at Merced, it's important for us to adopt that particular framework. So these diversity of thought, there's many definitions, but as that process embarks, through community engagement, through these collective processes, we should be able to have a common understanding as informed by the equity and justice strategic planning process, which includes faculty, staff, students, community members, et cetera.
Thank you, Cynthia. Another statement, how representative petitions and demands from stakeholder groups are and to what degree broad community polling has been done. So they wanted someone to comment on the fact of how representative petitions and demands from stakeholder groups are and to what extent or degree broad, and to what degree broad community polling has been done.
Well, I think it depends on the issue, but we have certainly done broad climate surveys of faculty and staff both. And we've got longitudinal data about that as well. And I think in each of those cases, we have seen consistent challenges that have been presented in those data. So when we get demands from a particular quarter and they actually fit the picture of what our climate surveys are saying, I think that we can be fairly comfortable that this isn't just an outlying circumstance or special interest group, but is in fact representative of a reality that significant portions of our campus community are experiencing. And we cannot, I mean, this in a weird way, I think this circles right back to diversity of thought. We don't advance thinking without confronting ideas that make us uncomfortable. The progress of thought is about a bit of frisson, shall we say, real tension. And when we exclude any part of our community, no matter how difficult their words happen to be or how uncomfortable they make some of us feel, we're actually excluding diversity of thought and limiting progress. So I think we have polled significantly, and I think we have responded appropriately to some subsets of our campus community that our broad polling have shown have legitimate concerns.
And I'd also like to add that when engaging with folks as we respond to some of these petitions and demands, we ensure that we're tapping into various groups that exist on our campus that not only delves into various stakeholders, but also various representative groups, from the Pan-African Council for our students, Staff and Faculty Color Association, and other groups that ensure that we represent various groups of interest. And so we ensure that, while we cannot meet the needs of all, we're getting a deep representation of the various needs that do exist on our campus and can make those decisions accordingly. And we attempt as much as possible to also engage in conversations like this, where we can get pretty regular pulse checks on, where is our campus community on these issues. And I have to cut off the Q&A at this point so that we can ensure that we stick to our time and engage in a critical portion of this town hall, which is getting some feedback from our attendees. I see the questions that are still in the Q&A. I will make sure all of those questions are documented and that we use future opportunities in which we connect with our campus community to address those questions so that they're not just left in the wind. So before we launch into our feedback activity, I'd like to give a huge thank you to Chancellor Munoz and Provost Canfield for answering these critical questions, and for our interim CDO Howard for moderating and also answering questions. And of course, Dr. DeLugan for jumping in for your contribution to the task force and also the critical and community engagement work that you have taken part in. So thank you all for addressing some of those questions. And so at this point, I'd like to launch into a feedback activity. And so in envisioning this town hall, this isn't just an opportunity for us to throw some information at you and just take questions, but it's also an opportunity for us as implementers of this initiative to understand where our campus is. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of these responses came specifically from a response to the murder of George Floyd, and we have to keep checking in with our campus community about where your needs are now. And so there was a link that was dropped in the chat that leads to a Google document. And so fair warning ahead of time, there is a limit on how many people can access that Google Doc at the same time. So if you're not allowed in right now, this link will stay live and I'll be sure that you receive it. And so what you'll see in this document is a table with a question at the top that says, what should UC Merced prioritize to demonstrate that we value Black lives? And so in the table on the left-hand side, you'll write in your response. If you see that someone has already written a response that you agree with, you can indicate your agreement in the right-hand column with a little plus sign. And so this gives us an idea, this will help give us an idea of what your priorities are as a campus as it relates to the Valuing Black Lives Initiative, and will help us build out the initiative accordingly. So I'm going to give folks a couple minutes to log in and type in their responses, based on what you've heard today, and also just based on your own priorities as you think about this work moving forward. And also keep in mind, this document will remain open until end of day, Friday the 17th. So I'm going to give folks a few minutes to start filling in that table. And of course, please also share the link to this Google Doc with folks who weren't able to attend the town hall so that we can ensure we're getting everyone's perspective. All right, as I'm seeing the table slowly fill up, I'll point folks who've already finished with activity 1. If you're not done with the first question, feel free to complete your thought. But if you'd like to move on, if you scroll down to about page 3, activity 2 poses the question, how can UC Merced best demonstrate its commitment to accountability and transparency while advancing the Valuing Black Lives Initiative? So as was discussed in the presentations and also during the Q&A, accountability is a key piece towards implementing this initiative successfully. And so we'd like to get an understanding of what accountability and transparency looks like to you as it relates to this initiative. So same directions as the first table, typing in your responses on the left-hand side and indicating your agreements with a plus sign on the right side. And I'll give folks a couple minutes on that one before we close out. And again, the Google Doc will stay open for you all until Friday, in case you've got to sit with your thoughts a little bit. All right, so I will begin to close us out, but again, please keep in mind the Google Doc will be available to you until Friday the 17th. And again, share it to folks who weren't available to attend the town hall so that we get feedback from as much of our campus community as possible. Thank you all again for joining us today in this critical conversation as we launch these first steps of this overall initiative. I look forward to continuing to engage with you all as we build out this initiative. We will, like I said, the activity will remain available until Friday the 17th for you to fill out, and you will also be receiving a post-event email with all the relevant links that were provided today, including the Google Doc, including some of the links in the presentation, and a feedback survey as well that we'd like you to fill out to also just give us an idea of how helpful these town halls offer you in getting the information that you need to understand the process of this initiative and help us better improve future conversations that we do hold. Please check out our website, which will also be included in the email, that outlines the progress of the initiative thus far. And most importantly, if you or anyone in your unit is doing work to value Black lives, please share it with us. As we mentioned throughout today's town hall, this is a collaborative effort, and our role is partly to amplify and support the existing efforts that have existed long before this initiative began. So if there are any initiatives taking place in your unit, please share it with us. We will amplify it through many of our channels on our website and make sure it's captured as we continue to report out on the Valuing Black Lives Initiative. And so you can share that to the diversity@ucmerced.edu email, which you will receive an email from following this event. So you can just respond directly to it and let us know what you or your unit is doing to advance this initiative. And I will lastly just turn it over to our interim CDO, Howard, for any final words or closing thoughts at the end of this town hall.
Yes, thank you, Hala. I'm going to be real quick because my voice, for whatever reason, is leaving me today. First of all, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your attendance here today, for your participation on panels, and for your input, for your questions that were posed. They're very meaningful to us, and we will utilize all of those questions and any other comments that you pose to us moving forward. Although again, I'm interim, but I am not of an interim mindset. So I will be, I'm in the middle, as a matter of fact, of conducting listening tours around campus. I want to meet with as many individuals as possible. I would love your feedback in terms of what you believe, where do you believe this initiative could go, or what you believe we could be doing more of as it pertains to this initiative. I want to hear from everybody and everything that you have to offer. Also, our office, the Office of EDI, I also maintain CDO drop-in hours. So if you contact our office, you can be apprised of when those times are, and I would love to have you come by then. Or if you want to just email and schedule a regular time to meet with my office or my staff, then we'd be more than happy to meet with you. Finally, let me say this. A college president once said during a conference that I attended many years ago, that if we, talking about leaders, leaders within higher education, if we're going to be transformative in this DE&I work that we do, we must be reminded that the work starts with us senior leaders. This was a college president saying that. And then she went on to say, we must do more than talk the talk. We must walk the talk. My colleagues, let me be very clear in saying this. In our industry or in our institution of higher learnings around the country, it's very difficult, and I might even add it's very rare, to find senior leadership who's not only willing to talk the talk, but who's willing to walk the talk, who's willing to be extremely deliberate and intentional and substantive in the work that we're doing in this space. I believe we're blessed here at UC Merced, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to come over to handle this interim role and responsibility, because of the work that we're doing. Consider yourselves blessed in this particular space. And so I would say, just continue moving onward and upward, continue bringing your ideas, because your ideas turn into initiatives. Initiatives create and continue to contribute toward the culture that is being created here at this young institution. I would say just continue doing what you're doing. And I know we and OEDI will continue that regard as well. So I want to thank you again. Thank you, Chancellor Munoz. Thank you, Provost Canfield, in this regard here. Thank you for the leadership here at UC Merced. Thank you for the staff at OEDI. And thank you for everybody and all of our stakeholders affiliated in this space, because we are on to something special. I must continually remind you of that. We are on to something special. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Hope you have a great rest of your day.